What is up, everybody? Back again with another video. In today's video, we're finally back with the My Book series. I know it's been a while since I've partook in this series, but I've also have not been very involved with the book recently. I've kind of just been, it hasn't been my focal point. But I am feeling a little better in terms of the book, and so I figured the best way to get back into writing the book again is to make a video on it. So we're going to talk about a chapter that is being written at the current moment that I've just started working on. And I wanted to jump ahead a little bit just because I feel like since I've been going in order, that's been great, but I feel like it would be more interesting to jump ahead a little bit and kind of get a better idea going forward. And so, with that being said, we're going to get right into it. We're going to be picking up in 2114, in around early Christmas of 2114, and we're going to be going into July as well. All right, so let's get into it. So, as many of you guys have known from, if you guys keep up with any of the information I've released on Discord with the book, or if you guys have been keeping up with the series here on YouTube, it has been a pretty chaotic time for the EDF as well as all of humanity in general. But the last invasion that happened was, well, bad for the Exil, to put it slightly. The EDF really did step up their game in the Western United States. And after the victories in London and the UK, the EDF were able to regain control of Europe, with the central hub of Europe, which will be the UK. It's kind of like the hub where everyone kind of can reorganize themselves and kind of regroup. And so they've regained that around 2108. They regained control of London. London was the big focal point of the UK that was important to get, because London was like the city of the UK. So once London was controlled, pretty much all of the Exil kind of abandoned the UK as a whole. Then after that, they kind of went on a winning streak over here in the Western Hemisphere. Pretty much all of the United States was recaptured. Most of Canada was recaptured. All of Mexico and a huge chunk of South America was also recaptured. And we were just spreading like wildfire. The victories were coming left, right, center, from behind, west, east, north, everywhere. And the EDF had one big thing they wanted to do. They wanted to retake Europe. This was now the idea of ending the war. This became a phenomenon throughout this time. And for the next 2.5 years, around 2110 and 2112, this phenomenon kind of spread like wildfire throughout the United States, as well as some of the countries that were recaptured. And that was the idea, to end this war now. Let's end this thing. Because at this point, the war has been going on since the 2040s, so we're beyond that 100-year length of war, making this one of the longest, if not the longest, war in human history at this point. And so this has become a problem, because unlike past wars, like for example, if you have the 100 Years' War, there wasn't actually war all 100 years of the 100 Years' War, right? Like for that war, it was, a couple years of war here, then kind of peace for the most part, then wars, then peace again, etc. But this war has been dragging on for pretty much every day for the last 110 years or so. So it's been rough for a lot of the men fighting overseas. I mean, you have guys that went in 2040 that were 25 years old. Now they are mastery sergeants or even generals around their 40s, with kids who are in their 20s who are now also fighting as grunts on the front line. So this is something where generations are now fighting in the same exact war as each other, and both generations are now growing up with the war. And so there's this urge to want to end this war as quickly as possible. Now they see the opportunities within their grasp. So the EDF pulled together all their resources into one massive invasion of Europe. This would be the largest naval, military, and air invasion Europe has ever seen, including the Second World War as well. Over 1 million infantry will be landing on the shores and on the coastlines of Europe, from the top of France and Belgium into going into Germany, etc., Spain. All the countries in the middle and coastal side of Europe are going to be invaded to kind of regain a kind of a foothold. Along with these 1 million men is around 1.6 million aircraft, millions of tanks, around 214,000 battleships and aircraft carriers and cruisers, and the aircraft are in the tens of millions. This is the largest scaled invasion that the humanity has ever put together, and the idea is to hit the Exil so hard that it crushes them and forces them to surrender. Because at this point, if we keep in mind, at this point, the Exil that the EDF are fighting, the 47th, the 89th, and the 194th Exil infantry divisions, are all extremely weak divisions. Right? They have been weakened throughout years of fighting. These are divisions that have been here since the first and second invasions of Earth. So they have been here for like 40 something years. So there are weaker divisions that have been fighting the Americans and the EDF so far. And so the EDF has no idea what's actually waiting for them in Europe. Well, Europe has been a dead zone for the most part. Like Center Europe, like Ukraine, the Middle East, or even closer to like Germany, has been relatively untouched by humanity since they fell back in the 2030s and 2040s, or not 2030s, sorry, 2050s and 2040s. And so the Exil have been kind of just camping there, relatively speaking. Now, with all of this in tone, the EDF began their invasion. They want to take back Europe. So their plan is by July, have everything ready to go. And so the next couple of months, from like early December of that year, they're beginning the plan. The men are being trained. Men are finally getting rations and food rations, getting new armor, new weapons, more ammo. Things that a lot of the guys on the front lines have been suffering without for a very, very long time due to resource limitations. But now that majority of the Earth is able to be accessed now, it's not blocked off by cloaked bombers from the Exil's 3rd Air Corps. The Americans, the EDF, are able to kind of branch out now and kind of get access to things they have not had access to in the past. So when July finally comes around, the EDF are ready. Okay, they're prepared. Morale is high. The excitement is high back home. There's parties and celebrations going on, trying to celebrate whatever they can. Unfortunately, nothing happens. And not in the sense that like they don't attack. The EDF do. They land. But in the sense that nothing happens in the fact that there's no firefights. There's no gunfights. There's no battles. There's no anything. The EDF and Americans land on the soil, and that's it. Literally, that's it. There's no Exil. There's no anything for miles to see. And the question begins to arise is, what the fuck happened? Because from what the EDF know from their satellite images is that there's something was supposed to happen. There was supposed to be some form of Exil things here, some form of them, and then some fashion. And it would be a couple days after the landing that they would start to notice odd things, and we'll get to that in a second. But on the morning of July 23rd, 2114, the men of the 153rd, the 45th, and the 2nd Marine Divisions would be the ones that would be at the front of the line. So think of it as a giant letter L, but the L is backwards. So from France and near Norway direction, it would be the top of the L, which would be the pointy part, and down the coastline and pretty much a straight line would be the rest of the divisions. The 153rd, 45th, and the 2nd U.S. Marines, they were stationed near the corner of the L. So they would be near Spain direction towards Italy. And so these guys were the front lines. Like this was the dead center of the line. Both other ends were strong, but not nearly as strong as the center. The center was what was important. The center had most of the main FOBs and forward operating bases, as well as like all the makeshift docks that were made so that the supplies could be brought back and forth from Europe into America. Now, the 153rd would write a bunch of times from different men from different parts of the unit, from different chunks of the battlefield. They would often write back that the air was calm, everything was calm, like eerily calm. And it's something you have to understand. Like these guys, a lot of these guys in these units are from ages of like 17 to 21. Okay, that is the majority of the age range that you're seeing on the front lines. Your older guys, your guys that are 30, 40, 50, 60, they're your sergeants, your generals, your lieutenants, your corporals, etc. So they're not necessarily on the front line, but they're there kind of in the same sense, depending on, like, if you're a sergeant, obviously the sergeants are a little closer to the front lines than, say, a general would be. But anyway, the men are used to combat, right? A lot of these guys have hundreds of battles under their belts. Like, we're talking hundreds. Like, think of it like what a normal guy in today's age, a normal soldier, may have one or two big battles under their belt, right? Like a guy in Afghanistan might remember one or two of the big battles that happened, right? Where like he's having an actual battle. But the rest of his time is firefights, right? Like just little skirmishes that he has. The difference is this is not, for these guys, these aren't skirmishes. They're having battles every single day. We're talking fighting in cities, fighting on the front lines every single day. There is no breaks in between. There's no off days. There's no days where they're just on patrol, because the battle is always there. There is no need for patrols. They're just always in combat. A lot of these guys sleep with guns on their chest, ready to go. Some guys are reported to be sleeping with their fingers on the trigger because of how often they're in combat. So these guys are used to chaos, and so when they're in a situation where there's no chaos, it's concerning for them. But obviously that concern will be justified very shortly. So anyway, the Americans are kind of confused. We're trying to figure out what the fuck is happening, why it's so quiet. There's no signs of anything. There's no signs of anything. No animals, no other humans, there's no exil, there's nothing. It's just like an apocalypse, but anything with life was killed, and it was just the houses, the roads, the plants, and that's about it. And so they're camping out in these cities, they're camping out in the fields, in these trenches that were built, because they came prepared for a battle, right? They came prepared to be dug in, fighting and sieging over Europe for a while until they can conquer it. But nothing. And that was until the morning of July 27th, which was several days later, when a massive boom was heard. In quotes, it was like thunder, but if thunder was angry at you, specifically you. Now, mind you, a few days before the massive explosion they've heard, they were feeling rumbles underground, and they couldn't explain it. It felt like an earthquake, but Europe really doesn't have earthquakes, so it made no sense why they would be feeling the explosions or feel like a rumbling underground, and they couldn't figure out why. Unbeknownst to them, the exil had been hibernating underground because they've had no reason to go above ground. These aliens, these exil, they're weird creatures, right? They don't necessarily need the earth. They just need somewhere to collect water, collect resources. So when they're not fighting, they're doing what they originally came to do. They're not here to build a home. They're here to suck the life out of the earth and take what they need from it. And so, obviously, for a lot of the guys on the front lines, they have no fucking clue this is happening because they're fighting the infantry. They're fighting the attackers for the exil, right? The guys that they're fighting with. So they're not down on the ground or in the ocean stealing resources when they're on the front lines. They're fighting the Americans or the EDF. So as time goes on, these rumbles over the next couple of days get worse and worse. And then finally, like I said, on the July 27th, the big explosion is heard. and all hell breaks loose. The Americans in the EDF were not prepared for this at all. A lot of the guys have let their guard down after a couple of days of no fighting. They got kind of used to it, and so they let their guard down. When the explosion happened, the entire front line, all the way up from Norway and France direction, all the way down to Spain and Italy, the entire front line engulfed in explosions. It was like a fiery hell, is what one corporal wrote in his diary. The Exil just funneled out of underground by the millions. It turns out that the 199th Exil Heavy Fighter Division was stationed in Europe, which is a 1.2 billion man unit. I'm not shitting you. It's massive. This is one of the largest Exil infantry divisions and one of the most untested divisions that the Americans have fought so far. And this division overwhelms everyone at the same time. The line is just engulfed in suffering. A lot of the guys wrote in their diaries that it was like the demons from hell just got awokened, or if the devil himself had arose. The entire front lines were overran. We're talking thousands of casualties in milliseconds. The entire 2nd Division of the 2nd Marine Division was nearly completely wiped out in the initial assault. The men that were still surviving tried to retreat. They tried to pull back. The Exil began to surround them, breaking the line near France and completely funneling in like a funnel. And it was a complete disaster. The casualty rates were awful. By the time the end of the day of the 27th, over half the Americans that landed, so nearly 500,000 were dead. Another 500,000 were now split up. And at this point, it's believed that there is chunks of the remnants of this initial assault still everywhere. Like, say, for example, there's 100,000 in France or 10,000 here in Spain, etc. They're all kind of split up. Everyone's trying to retreat back to the front lines, away from the front lines to the ocean. The Navy got hit extremely hard in that initial assault. The Air Force was unprepared, and the Exil fighters were able to kind of gain the upper hand. So for a lot of the guys on the ground, on the front lines, that were trying to pull back, to regroup, because that was the whole game plan. If something was to go wrong, the EDF ordered all men to fall back. If it went wrong, like if the attack failed, and they couldn't withhold it, to pull back to the coastline, make your final stand on the coast, while the rest of reinforcements come from America, Canada, and Mexico. The EDF had held a command center in London. London was now under construction. It had been under construction for about 2 years now, since it was reoccupied. So in London, they got the messages that shit was going down, and it was going down fast. The EDF, by the time the EDF got the information on what was happening in Europe, the casualty rates have already hit around 500,000. So it didn't take very long for those death rates to hit. The entire L-shaped line of defense they had crumbled. The entire armored divisions of the EDF were locked behind battlefields. There is stories of how the entire 5th Armored Division, which was basically a bunch of tanks, heavy personnel carriers, etc., got completely trapped in a cavern when the Exil completely blew a mountain down, completely knocking like a mountain slide, blocking in the armored unit and completely wiping the armored unit completely out. And this was happening all throughout Europe. As things went down, the units got trapped. There was no way to escape. And so now the EDF is trying to figure out how the hell they're going to put things back together. How are they going to fix the problems at hand? How are you going to solve this problem? And the EDF orders a total standstill of all forces. Obviously, the guys on the front lines don't give a fuck about that order. Their main priority is getting off the front lines. We're talking groups of guys who are doing everything in their power not to die on the front lines. So they pull back a lot of their forces to to the coastline. The guys that can't get to the coastline, well, they're just out of luck. A lot of the guys in the 153rd U.S. Marine Division, instead of falling back, they decide to push even further inland to try to gain some type of foothold. And so, for a while, it seems to work, since a lot of the Auxiliary are focused on pushing the rest of the waves back. Does give the 153rd a little bit of time to kind of move themselves up. And they start going out in small squadrons, small groups, and they make it pretty far inland before getting completely entrapped. And so now the 153rd is now trapped behind enemy lines, and this entire thing is a disaster. The casualty rates skyrocket to around 600,000, and by this point, the invasion the ADF had hoped had failed. Now it was Operation Save What You Can and Who You Can, and retry again another day. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I wanted to show that the urgency that the EDF and all of them have to finish the war that they're in, right? Because at this point, before this chapter, a lot of the chapters have been talking about how they want to just win the war, not even win it like fast, just to win it. That was the goal. But the 2100s have been a really good time for Earth. The victories have been crazy, the Exil have been weaker, and so that there's just been this desperation to just to win this war now. Like there was a victory in sight, but unfortunately, it was not made to be so. But that's pretty much all of the chapters so far. I definitely am more excited to get back into and writing more. The biggest thing for me is I really just want a story that is constantly having you hold your holding yourself up. I'm trying to think of a better way to describe it. Kind of holding yourself on the edge of your seat, I think, is a better way to describe it. That is why I'm trying to make it as comfortable as possible, but also have it that it's not comfortable all the time, because I think the problem with a lot of these war movies is like you can kind of see when things are going to go well and you can see when things are going to go bad. I want people to be like never to trust whether or not they're going to make it out okay, because unfortunately in this story, many of the people that fight in the war do not make it out. But yeah, Europe is now a war-torn zone, but now the thing is now that most of the Earth is reoccupied by the United States and the EDF, the resources for the war in Europe are now higher than ever before, so maybe, just maybe, the EDF will be able to recuperate from this loss. The men and women still fighting in Europe are still trapped as of this current moment in the story. So now there's a massive rescue mission that needs to be completed in order to save the nearly 250,000 troops that are still locked behind enemy lines. A lot of the Exil attacks did kind of pull back, so they're not nearly as bad. So now it's kind of a stalemate. So we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, I hope you guys are excited for me to be back doing this old style content that I used to do before BO6. The Keep It Real series is coming back. The podcast is coming back. I haven't just been doing stuff that's not COD related. But I'm trying to get back into it again. So the podcast will be back soon. Have patience with that, and I promise it'll be worth it in the long run. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Later.